What's up, family? For today's episode, we're going to be doing an indoor picnic, and shish kebabs is on the menu. We're going to be using the tri-tip cut of beef from Vermont Wagyu. Turkey is actually the country most famous for putting shish kebabs on the map, but there were references to shish kebab in the Odyssey by Homer, and even archaeologists have unearthed artifacts from 17th century BC of skewer setups for roasting meat. Eating meat and vegetables on a stick is a human instinct. So if you need something to cheer the family up, a nice indoor picnic vibe, double tap and watch on. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is I have my raspberries. I've rinsed them out. I'm going to throw them into a pot here, and I have apple cider. Turn on my pot, pour in some of the cider, just enough to give it some liquid. This is going to be our barbecue sauce. So now what I have here is my air fryer that's been on for about 6 minutes preheating. Here we're going to make some potatoes. So I salt my potatoes. I see that I actually put a little bit too much oil in there. We'll try to wipe out that excess oil. Salt, pepper, garlic right here. I'm going to, kind of be nice and liberal with the seasoning. I'm going to pop them in the air fryer. My air fryer is going to be set to 350 degrees. I'm going to start checking these potatoes about 15 minutes in. I'm actually going to move this air fryer out of the way. I'm going to connect it into another outlet, but I wanted to show you the start. Once this is finished, I'll show you what it looks like. For my next step, I've washed and dried my peppers. I wiped down my mushrooms with a wet paper towel, and I'm just gonna cut them all in half. If I was cooking for company or for an event or for work, I would definitely trim off the mushrooms. When I'm cooking at home for myself, I don't really do that. It is slightly more tough and woody and all that, but it's definitely still edible. Next thing is just cutting our peppers in half. So right now I'm just taking my knife and kind of scraping out the seeds. So here what I have is my mushroom, my peppers, and in this jar I have some coconut oil. So I'm gonna take some out, and you can actually maybe hear my air fryer just went off, so we're gonna check on those potatoes in a second. I'm rubbing my mushrooms with the coconut oil, and so I just season it real quick, salt, pepper, garlic powder. The reason why I season them separately in this way, or glaze them separately in this way, is because mushrooms just absorb so much. I don't want the peppers to be left out. And I'm just gonna drop my oiled vegetables right on top, so I'm just gonna throw these inside. So now real quick, I'm just gonna check on my raspberry sauce, mush it up. I'm gonna continue to let that reduce. So I just pulled my potatoes out the air fryer. So just checking on these real quick. It falls out with this little shake, has a little bite in there. So these guys are cooked through. For our next step, my apple cider is reduced. My raspberries are crushed up a bit. So now I'm gonna add the rest of my barbecue sauce ingredients. First thing I'm adding is ketchup. Measure out 1 cup for now. My secret ingredient for this sauce, Calvados. Calvados is a apple brandy out of France. When you taste this, it doesn't taste like fruity, like a sweet apple. It kind of has the base notes of apple, if you will, without any of the high-end notes. The number one rule of cooking is that I want to make sure that none of the ingredients I'm using are spoiled. Okay, it's not spoiled at all. I'm just gonna add a little 1/4 cup. I'm gonna back that up with about a shot of apple cider vinegar. Actually, just a half shot for now. I'm then gonna put in this much of mustard. So now I'm gonna whisk everything together and just kind of let it reduce down a little more. So I have my salt, black pepper, garlic powder. I'm gonna add in some smoked paprika, add some cumin, a little bit of cinnamon. I'm gonna give it a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. So at this point, my sauce is thickening. I'm just reducing the heat a little bit. So my sauce is now on the back burner. I'm gonna let it reduce. Right now, my heat's on a 4. For the sauce, the highest I've gone so far is about a 6 on heat. That was when I started with the vinegar and the raspberries. So now it's on a 4. I'm going to let it sit. Alright, so I've just pulled my vegetables out the broiler. They were in there for about 10 minutes. You're not at a barbecue unless you get some charred food. My mushrooms are nice. They still have like a texture that tells me that they'll have a chew to them. I'm just going to hold this aside until I'm ready to plate my kebabs. Meanwhile, I'm going to make sure that I'm, keeping my barbecue sauce stirred, the lightest simmer. So far for my spice rub, 2 tablespoons of white sugar and 2 tablespoons of chili flakes. Now I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of my salt, black pepper, garlic mix. Next thing I'm adding is freshly cracked black pepper, and I wanted kind of a little bit of a more coarse black pepper. And now we come to the 2 ingredients that's going to make our spice rub really special. First of those 2 ingredients, Bustelo, ground espresso. 1 nice teaspoon of Bustelo. This will give a nice bitterness, a nice earthiness to help with the richness of our steak, and also cocoa powder, 1 teaspoon. And this is 100% cacao, so this is going to be a little bitter too. And so now you kind of see why I put so much sugar, white sugar especially. Stir this up real quick. So I just gave it a taste. I see that I have room for some garlic powder. So now our spice mix looks good. When you taste it, you get the bitterness from the Bustelo, richness from the chocolate, some spiciness, salt. Give my barbecue sauce a swirl, get an idea for what the texture is. It's been simmering for about an additional 15 minutes now. So now time for the main event. We have the Vermont Wagyu Tri-Tip steak. This cut became popular in California, known as a Santa Maria steak. We have our Wagyu Tri-Tip. I took it out the bag. I dried, or the package, I dried it with a paper towel. Now I'm just gonna trim off excess fat and silver skin. Usually a very lean cut of meat, similar to, you know, maybe a flank. For this steak, since it's Wagyu, we see that we do still have some nice marbling going on, even though it's going to be a leaner cut of meat. Usually folks will grill, reverse sear, or even roast this whole. I'm actually going to cube it up. I'm just going to isolate the pieces by size a little bit, and then on my bigger piece I'm going to start cutting out my cubes. And what's great is that my tri-tip is so thick, I don't want my cubes to be too big, so first thing I'm going to do is the lateral cut. And this really gives you a great opportunity to see how great the marbling is. And now I'm gonna cut my meat into cubes, or cube-like shapes rather. But I don't want the meat to be too big in relation to other things on the kebab stick. Similar to when we did our Wagyu burgers, the more I handle this meat, the more the well-marbled fat in it starts rendering. I can tell that my meat's getting a little glistening, which is great because usually with a lean cut of steak like this, you would coat it with a little bit of oil before you add your spices. But since my meat has some moistness, some fattiness, I'm not worried about coating it with oil. I know that these spices are gonna stick. I'm gonna coat these cubes with my spice mix. What I'm doing is probably offending somebody somewhere right now. Not only did I take a tri-tip Santa Maria steak and cube it up, I'm also coating Wagyu beef with a spice mix, a well-flavored spice mix at that. If someone gives me one Wagyu steak, I'm gonna eat it with just salt and pepper. That's really the way to do it. The great thing with getting this Vermont Wagyu steak is that you get it by the box. The first cut of meat you eat, you know, you can season it mildly and enjoy the flavors, but after that, you get to do dope-ass shit with your Wagyu beef, for lack of a better phrase. You know, I don't want to over-season. I'm not trying to remove the richness of the actual beef, but I want to complement it in ways that I might not usually have. So now as my next step, I'm gonna separate out my cubes, isolate each stick so that similar sized cubes are in one stick so that they have similar cooking times. I'm searing these in my indoors, so in a pan, so the longest side of the beef, I want to make sure that it gets a good sear, rather than putting this on sideways and only the short sides of the beef get a good sear. So here's my first stick. Another thing to mention is you'll notice I seasoned my beef right before cooking. The smartest thing to do is to season a couple days ahead, some salt, let it sit in the fridge uncovered, and then I would add the rest of my spice mix and then cook it. Or I would season it right before cooking. When you season beef, you need at least an hour for the processes to take effect. That's going to tenderize and flavor your beef. So it's either season your beef right before cooking, or make sure you leave at least minimum an hour, just a salt, pepper mix on your beef in the refrigerator. Since I have a moment, I'm going to check on my barbecue sauce. I'm going to turn my heat down. Just keep this on a super low heat back here. Time for our last step of cooking before plating. I turned off my sauce. I'm going to let it cool down. So I'm just going to put a little oil. You can use any high heat cooking oil here. So our oil starts smoking pretty quickly. I'm just going to start dropping my stick. I'm trying to make sure that each piece of beef is touching the pan. So for these kebabs, what I'm doing, they're slightly too long for the pan, so I'm taking some kitchen shears and I'm kind of clipping off the ends. Use a knife if you want, and then I snap it so that I get a clean cut. And I use my kitchen shears again to trim it if I have an uneven cut. I kind of press to get a good sear. You want your beef to be a little separated to get the best sear possible. For reference, I have my heat here on high. While these are searing, I'm gonna turn my air fryer back on where my potatoes are. I'm gonna give it 5 more minutes at about 400 degrees to rewarm them. The beef is actually cooked pretty nicely. I'm just gonna take it right on off. So now we have our 4 meat skewers. So I'm gonna remove the meat from the sticks and assemble my shish kebabs. When it comes off, I'm gonna give it a last dusting of seasoning. So now we're just building our skewers over here. But my skewers is gonna have meat, some nice charred pepper. I'm actually gonna put tomato for a little bit of freshness and acidity, and then some mushroom. And now we plate. So first thing's going down is gonna be my barbecue sauce. I'm going the other way. Place my 2 skewers down. The last thing will be the potatoes. I'm doing this picnic style, so it's rustic. So here it is. Beef Wagyu kebab. And there you have it, folks. Vermont Wagyu beef skewers seasoned with Bustelo and cocoa powder, with some broiled peppers, broiled mushrooms, fresh tomato, on a shish kebab with a homemade barbecue sauce, a raspberry, Calvados, apple brandy sauce. We had some air fried potatoes. Today we're doing this picnic style, so we have our little blanket, our Trulies. We're still inside though, don't worry. I'm gonna take a bite, and check that nice temperature inside. How a tri-tip should be cooked. Salty, a little bitter, so definitely enjoying this one.